Hello and welcome. Look at the graph on the screen here. This is an example of the graph of a polar equation. Just like graphs on a rectangular coordinate system help to provide visual representations of linear, quadratic, and other types of equations, polar graphs are useful for providing visual representations of polar equations. Our lesson question is, how is a polar equation graphed? Using a polar coordinate grid, you can use the relationship between the radius and the angle in polar equations to create curves such as a rose curve, as well as to determine the important characteristics of these equations. Polar equations are not only interesting because of their picturesque curves they produce, but also because of their application to real-world problems such as audio technology. To address your lesson question, we will explore polar equations and their graphs. In order to analyze polar equations and their graphs, we will graph or describe the graph of a polar equation, convert between polar and rectangular equations, use a polar equation to represent or interpret a real-world scenario, and solve a problem involving one or more polar equations or graphs. Words to know. Here are important words you'll learn in this lesson. Limousin curve, polar equation, pole, and rose curve. Recall that polar coordinate system is a two-dimensional coordinate system where points are determined by a radial distance, r, and a polar angle, theta. Unlike rectangular coordinate system, where points are uniquely represented by one ordered pair, polar coordinates can be represented by an infinite number of ordered pairs. When plotting points on the polar coordinate system, we begin at the origin of the polar axis. We first work with the polar angle value and then extend the radial distance to plot the ordered pair. Let's look at an example. Our first example is going to be 2 comma pi over 3. The theta value, pi over 3, is positive. So we begin at the origin and rotate pi over 3 radians counterclockwise. So we're going to go in this direction. Our polar coordinate is somewhere along this line. Now we need to use the radius value, which is going to be 2, so that we could plot our point. The radius is 2, so we move 2 units out from the pole along the pi over 3 ray. This is the polar coordinate. Can you name other ordered pairs that also represent this point?